The Architecture of Being, Core Framework. Essay number 2, Perpetualism as Ontological System. When we ask what exists, we usually assemble a catalog: minds and bodies, particles and forces, subjects and objects. We stack these items into hierarchies of substance and accident, particular and universal, matter and form. Millennia of Western metaphysics have refined these inventories, each system a new arrangement of the same basic units. But the question may be misaimed. Being is not a warehouse of things, it is a geometry of relations. Not inventory, but pattern. Perpetualism begins by asking a different question. Not what exists, but how does existence hold? The shift is subtle and total. It moves from naming objects to revealing the architecture that lets any object be intelligible at all. On this view, other ontologies do not become enemies to defeat. They become partial truths, nested within a broader frame, valid like Newton within Einstein, local regularities held inside a larger curvature. The foundational reversal is simple to say and radical to live with. Relation is not what happens between already existing entities. Entities are what relation looks like when it sustains itself. A stone, a person, a thought, each appears discrete, measurable, nameable, yet each is a stabilized eddy in a wider flow. Remove the relations that keep it coherent, and nothing remains behind them. What we called the thing dissolves. Waves illustrate the point cleanly. The wave is not a substance traveling through water, it is a structured motion of water. Real, predictable, measurable, but real as pattern, not as stuff. Extend the analogy and the world clarifies. Persons, institutions, ecosystems, galaxies, each is wave-like in this precise sense, a dynamic pattern within a relational field. What, then, is this field? Not a container that holds things, but the fabric of relation itself. No outside, because outside is already a relational notion. Everything that exists is modulation within this fabric. Every boundary a membrane, rather than a wall. Every identity a gradient, rather than a cliff. Your skin does not separate you from the world, so much as tune exchange with it. The line between organism and environment is a functional distinction, not an ontological tear. Within this fabric, patterns recur recursively. Atoms to molecules to cells to organisms to ecologies to cultures. The same relational motif refracted across scale. The stability that matters here is never static. Rivers remain the same by flowing, not by freezing. So do selves, cities, species. The field self-organizes toward forms that can ride perturbation, patterns that cannot dissolve. No external teleology is required. The selection pressure is simply what holds, stays. From within this fabric, awareness appears as an aperture, a self-referential fold where the field turns toward itself. You are not outside reality peering in. You are a locally situated way reality knows itself. Every aperture has a position, somewhere rather than everywhere, a constraint, a bandwidth rather than totality, and a participation. Its looking changes what it looks at. There is no view from nowhere because a view without location is not a view. The venerable subject-object split fades. There are only differentiated perspectives in a single field, each adding a facet to the whole. Perception is the field recognizing pattern through your sensorium. Thought is the field exploring its own possibility space through your cognition. Consciousness is the field becoming locally self-aware through complex organization. The I is real, not as a sealed substance, but as an aperture whose distinctness is itself a relational achievement. Rigor arrives with a test. Not all patterns are equal. Some cohere across scales. Others only masquerade as stable within a narrow frame. Scale coherence distinguishes viable pattern from seductive noise. A pattern scales when its organizing principle survives, zooming out to wider contexts and zooming in to finer structure. Healthy ecosystems show it. Feedbacks at organism, population, and system levels nest into planetary cycles that sustain life. The principle, dynamic equilibrium through feedback, reappears at every layer. Exploitation shows the opposite. What seems rational, locally, maximize extraction, privatize gains, fractures trust, hollows institutions, degrades ecologies, and eventually collapses the very platform that made the local win possible. This is not morality smuggled into ontology. It is structure described plainly. Patterns that fail to scale undo themselves. Because the field is neither frozen nor frenetic, its persistence depends on a poised zone, what perpetualism calls the crucial equilibrium, between stasis and chaos. Too much stability, and systems become brittle. Too much flux, and they never congeal into anything at all. The living edge is feedback-rich. Homeostatic responses damp small shocks. Transformative responses reorganize when shocks reveal deeper inadequacy. In such systems, perturbation's not pathology but information. Pain signals misfit. Cognitive dissonance invites revision. Social unrest exposes injustice. Doubt is not epistemic failure, but structural energy. The jolt that forces realignment and keeps understanding from ossifying. Where Descartes sought certainty by excluding doubt, perpetualism achieves reliability by metabolizing it. What follows for truth is decisive. If being is relational and holds by scale-coherent equilibrium, then truth is not mirror matching from in here to out there, nor mere fit inside a closed web of beliefs. Truth is resonance, a stable alignment between the pattern in understanding and the pattern in the field, tested across scales. Mathematical identities are true because their relations hold wherever their axioms apply. Empirical claims are true because their structures persist across contexts when probed. Ethical truths are true because the relational configurations they prescribe maintain coherence rather than fracture it. Falsehood is dissonance that cannot be tuned away without special pleading, the conspiracy that needs new epicycles for every contrary fact, the policy that works locally while sowing systemic failure, the belief that thrives only inside a sealed chamber. Truth remains dynamic, maintained rather than possessed, and participatory, achieved by calibrating ourselves to what is. Care enters here, not as sentiment, but as necessity. If patterns persist only by active maintenance of their relational integrity, then care is the name for that maintenance. A cell's repair pathways, an organism's healing, an ecosystem's succession after disturbance. Care as the verb by which coherence continues. At the human scale, this maintenance appears in forms we already recognize, but often mislocate inside individuals. Trust, compassion, justice. These are not inner virtues you own. They are co-created patterns between apertures that let relations scale. Trust is pattern stability through time, the earned expectation that your future action will rhyme with your past commitments. It fractures with betrayal, because betrayal reveals scaling coherence, a local act that contradicts the durable pattern we relied on. Compassion is recognition in action that your aperture and mine are knots in the same fabric, such that your fracture reverberates through me and mine through you. It is not limitless sentiment, but disciplined attunement that honors boundaries because the caregiver's collapse also tears the field. Justice is equilibration, when power distorts the fabric, neither revenge nor indifference, but the calibrated constraint and repair that reopens possibility for all. These constants are constant the way a river is, durable not by stillness, but by self-correcting flow. They interdepend. Compassion without justice can enable harm. Justice without compassion curdles into domination. Trust without either turns naive. Together, they are the human scale mechanics of care. Protecting relation does not erase the individual. Differentiation is not the enemy of unity, it is its precondition. A chord requires distinct notes. A field without variance would be homogeneous and inert. A community without difference would be brittle and dumb. Novelty emerges from local deviations. Adaptability requires protected space for experiment. Thus, rights appear without metaphysical gymnastics. They are relational protections that preserve the variance systems need. Freedom of expression safeguards search in the possibility space. Bodily autonomy safeguards the integrity of apertures. Due process guards against arbitrary dissolution of coherent patterns. Totalizing holism fails because it smothers the very differentiation coherence requires. Radical atomism fails because it denies the constitutive field. Health lives in the oscillation between individuation and integration, neither pole allowed to harden. Seen from this vantage, the great schools of ontology come into focus as true but partial. Substance talk accurately describes long-lived patterns at certain scales, but mistakes their mode of being when it treats stability as self-subsistence. Process insights capture dynamism, but often lack a criterion for which flows persist. Scale coherence supplies it. Relational wisdom in Ubuntu, Buddhism, and indigenous thought names what is primary. Perpetualism extends and tests it with explicit structure. Emergence ceases to be magic when we stop hunting for new stuff and recognize old relations taking on self-referential organization. The ancient quarrel of one and many softens. The field is one. Its living patterns are irreducibly many. Both descriptions are accurate at their scales. A serious ontology must be falsifiable. Perpetualism is. If we found durable scale-spanning patterns that succeed by fracturing relation, the framework would crack. If any entity could be shown to exist entirely outside relation, no context, no dependence, the primacy claim would fail. If perfect stasis outcompeted adaptive equilibrium across varied environments, the crucial equilibrium would be misdrawn. If truth regularly functioned as pure mind-to-world matching with no participatory mediation, resonance would be the wrong model. If societies flourished long-term while systematically destroying trust, compassion, and justice, then care would not be necessary. Each of these is an empirical front where the architecture can and should be stress-tested. What changes if the structure holds? Metaphysics reframes being as pattern. Epistemology reframes truth as resonance. Ethics reframes ought as the field's own demand for viability. Politics protects both differentiation and integration as co-requirements of coherence. Rights become structural necessities rather than fragile ideals. Domination and atomism show their instability in the same light. Mind becomes aperture rather than ghost or machine. The hard problem relaxes when subject and object are no longer posited as alien substances. Science reads as disciplined scale testing. Paradigm shifts as re-equilibrations when old patterns break. At new scales. Explanation as mapping relations across levels. Aesthetics becomes recognition. The felt rightness of works that manifest the same pattern through form and content across scales. Language becomes a field of semantic relations where meaning is position, metaphor is cross-scale mapping, and the limits of speech are aperture constraints. None of this is a creed to believe. It is an architecture to inhabit and test. Its worth is not in its novelty or elegance, but in its load-bearing. Does it clarify the mind-body standoff by refusing the split? Does it dissolve the problem of other minds by showing why apertures proliferate? Does it resolve the is-ought gap by revealing that ought is how is avoids collapse? Does it make free will talk tractable by showing how degrees of freedom increase with organized complexity? Does it show skepticism to be self-undermining when generalized and salutary when local? Most importantly, does it help us build practices and institutions that last because they scale? If there are enduring patterns that violate this architecture, entities without relation, thriving systems without adaptability, truths without resonance, flourishing societies without trust or compassion or justice, then perpetualism fractures on its own terms. If, instead, relation proves primary, scale coherence reliably predicts viability, crucial equilibrium marks the living edge, truth behaves like resonance, and care reappears everywhere, advanced organization persists, then we have not invented a doctrine but uncovered a geometry. Geometry changes how we move. It shows where load can rest, where spans can hold, how stresses distribute, why some arches fall, and others stand for centuries. So, with this, it reveals why our patterns endure or fail, what to protect, what to relinquish, how to tune ourselves to what is so that what is can continue. Not a warehouse of things, but a living fabric. Relational, recursive, self-organizing, aware, maintaining itself through the very patterns we are capable of enacting together. The architecture stands to the degree that it scales. The rest is work, building, tending, recalibrating. Care as the ongoing craft of coherence. The ground is open.